Jump right in. A huge thanks to the Freshwater Future staff as well for helping us make all of this work and happen. And if you have any questions or details during the session, you can ask a question in the chat and they will be monitoring that and help you. So again, a huge welcome. Thank you all for taking the time. And Alana, if you would just do our tech overview.
Yeah, we just wanted to remind everyone, please stay muted while our presenters are speaking. You can feel free to have your video on or off, whatever you're most comfortable with. And yeah, put anything that you have in the chat for us. And then if you go into reactions, you can raise your hand there.
Excellent. Thank you, Alana.
Yeah.
And from there, we're going to jump right in. Introducing our first speaker will be Candace Mushat. She is the director of the Flint Community Water Lab. Candace, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of introducing Jonathan this morning, Mr. Jonathan Nelson. Jonathan is a senior advisor for technical assistance and community engagement to U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Office of Water Assistant Administrator Radica Fox. The Office of Water works to ensure that drinking water is safe, wastewater is safely returned to the environment, and surface waters are properly managed and protected. Prior to joining the EPA, Jonathan served as the policy director for the Community Water Center. He is a nationally recognized expert on strategies to secure access to safe and affordable drinking water for underserved communities, building resilient drinking water institutions, and growing trust and partnerships with frontline community water leaders. At this time, I present to you Mr. Jonathan Nelson.
Great, thanks, Candace. Can you all hear me all right? Can we do loud and clear? Okay, great. Well, hi everyone, and thanks so much for being here. My name is Jonathan Nelson. I appreciate being called a nationally recognized expert, but I think the real expertise is on the phone and in this space today with all of you. So just thank you all for being here, and I feel really grateful to be here, both because of what we're about to talk about, which we're so energized and excited by, but also because, as Candace just shared, I come from a community nonprofit prior to the EPA. So any chance I get to be able to be in a space like this, I jump at it. So really glad to be here, and thank you for Freshwater Future for organizing this. So I have a short presentation, and then we'll have some time to take questions if there's any. But what I wanted to do is just start by taking a moment to sort of step back and acknowledge a few realities that are really important when we talk about water. And by realities, many of these are challenges that we know all of you are grappling with. The first is that we know this moment when we're talking about this incredible opportunity through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which provides EPA $50 billion for water infrastructure. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. We know this moment is one of real excitement, but also one of real worry. On one hand, we've got a historic level of funding. On the other hand, there are so many challenges to getting this funding to communities that need it the most. And so we want to be real about that. And we'll talk some about what we're doing to try to bend the curve on those challenges. The second is we know there is so much need across the country, but there's particularly need in communities of color, in rural communities, in indigenous communities, as well as some of our urban communities. And we know that there's need in every single state, as well as across the territories. The third thing that's worth acknowledging is we know that we need to keep finding ways as EPA and as all of us to make sure that underserved communities get their fair share. and that our work isn't done until every community that lacks the infrastructure they need gets the infrastructure they need. We also know that the way that we'll get things right is through many, many more of these kinds of conversations, but also making sure that we're doing more than just having conversations, but that we're really finding ways to empower communities from across the country to participate in the process of spending this money. And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I come from a community background, community nonprofit background. The other thing that's important to recognize when we talk about community engagement and empowering the community is just to recognize that you all have a lot on your plates, that the communities that we're asking to participate are burdened in multiple ways and are under-resourced. So again, that's why I'm so grateful that all of you are here and for being invited to participate. We really don't take it lightly. And then the last thing before we jump into the slides that I want to just sort of take a moment to acknowledge is, despite all those challenges, we at EPA are so energized. You know, we're sobered, but we are so energized by this moment. We really believe that this bipartisan infrastructure law can be a difference maker for so many communities that don't have the infrastructure they need. Just on a personal note, my own family is served by a small water system that's out of compliance. So like with so many of you, this is not just the work that we do, this is personal for us. And we're gonna work with everyone we can. And we're gonna work days, nights, and weekends to take the biggest step forward possible with all of you. So with that, thank you again for being here. That's our commitment. And we have a lot of work to do. So let's dive in. So we can go to the next slide. So what we're gonna cover is a quick overview. And for some of you, this will be a refresher of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and many call it BILL for shorthand. And we'll talk a little bit about how the bipartisan infrastructure law can help communities address their water infrastructure needs. And then I want to share a few updates on where we are in this moment in terms of implementation. And then we'll close out this presentation with a few opportunities and resources to help you learn more. And I'll just recognize that people are coming into this conversation at different places. Some of you have heard some of this before. And so just bear with us if you've heard some of this before, but we want to make sure everyone has access to the information. I also just want to recognize that we've got folks from the state on the line as well, and this really is an all hands on deck. And so just want to acknowledge the work that the state is doing and recognize that we all have a lot of work to do together to get this right as we move forward. With that, we can go to the next slide. So this slide is a brief, for some of you, refresher. For some of you, this may be new, but a little bit on what is the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the bipartisan infrastructure law provides altogether around $1 trillion for infrastructure for many different types of infrastructure, for transportation, for water, for internet, for broadband. You can go down the list. We at EPA Office of Water are very excited that the bipartisan infrastructure law provides $50 billion to EPA for water infrastructure. That is the single largest investment in water infrastructure in the history of this country. Part of what is so exciting about this funding, though, is not just the amount, although the amount obviously is very important. We need every dollar, but part of what's important is the nature of the funding. So a significant amount of this funding is available in the form of grants or what's the more technically called principal forgiveness loans that are available for disadvantaged communities. And I'll just note, when we use that phrase, disadvantaged communities, you know, that is not the term that many of us prefer to use, but it is the term that's utilized in statute as part of the state revolving fund program, which we're going to be talking more about today. But the important takeaway is that there's a lot of funding that's going to be available to underserved communities that qualify as a disadvantaged community in the form of grants that can help make infrastructure more affordable. Another thing that's really important with the bipartisan infrastructure law is that we've got 5 years to implement the funding. And that's different than in some previous funding packages for infrastructure in the past, where we may have had a much shorter timeline. So that's important. Although 5 years is going to fly, which is why these conversations are important. And then lastly, I just want to note that a few of our priority goals at EPA around implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law are making sure that we really target resources to disadvantaged and underserved communities that may have not been able to access funding in the past, but that they need it. Making sure that we make rapid progress towards a lead-free future. So really investing and prioritizing funds to accelerate lead service line removal. Making sure that we're taking big steps forward to address what are called PFAS chemicals, or sometimes you hear them called forever chemicals. These are chemicals that were found in many different types of products that made those products non-stick, but these chemicals have gotten to the water and they are not good for anyone. So trying to make sure that we make progress to tackle those PFAS or forever chemicals. And then lastly, but so importantly, making sure that we're building resilience in our communities, particularly climate resilience in communities across the country. So if we go to the next slide, just to give you a few examples of projects that can help communities address their water challenges. And these are just some projects. This is not an exhaustive list. Some of you may have seen us talk about some of these projects before, but they include addressing lead service lines. They include making upgrades for communities' drinking water and wastewater treatments and pipes, or in some cases, building new treatment or new pipes for drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. We have an opportunity to not just help families that are served in communities served by centralized systems, but also help families that may be not connected to any system, but that are on their own, for example, household septic system, to make sure that we're investing in infrastructure for those families, either upgrading that infrastructure, or where we see families near a larger system, or where we see smaller systems near a larger system, looking at opportunities to do connections in a way that helps provide the infrastructure everyone needs and also builds resiliency and affordability. Making sure that we're addressing stormwater and flood needs. And also, this is so important out west, investing in water conservation projects. And then we've already talked about this a bit, but taking steps to address PFAS contamination challenges. One thing that's important to recognize is, in addition to these specific types of projects for water infrastructure, there's also an opportunity to bring other benefits to communities. So, for example, there's opportunities to create good jobs in communities, and there, of course, an opportunity to help communities be more healthy and to thrive economically. So if we go to the next slide, we want to give you a window into where we're at right now with implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law. So it's important to start with when this law was signed, which was last November. So we're really only a little over 6 months out, but we've been very busy, both at the federal level, and then when the speaker from the state shares their presentation, you'll hear that the states are very busy too. So one important step that EPA took in March was releasing what we call our implementation memorandum for the states. I didn't talk about this quite as much since I shared, it was the focus of my last presentation. Other speakers may cover it, but something really important to know, and hence the name of this forum, is that most of the funding, most of that $50 billion, about $43 billion is flowing to each of the 50 states through the State Revolving Fund Program. The State Revolving Fund Program is implemented by each state in partnership with EPA. The EPA sets out the broad framework, and then each state implements. And each state has a lot of discretion in how they implement to make sure that they're really meeting the needs of their communities. And there's an incredibly important role for communities to participate in each state's process. So this implementation memorandum that EPA released in March to the states sets out our guidance and our expectations and our recommendations for how we as EPA see the bipartisan infrastructure law being implemented. We really see it being a partnership with each state, and we really see an important role for communities to play, which is why we released this publicly, because there's a role for everyone in implementing this legislation. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this memorandum in a minute. A couple other updates that are important to stress for this audience. So the following month in April, we released a major funding opportunity for technical assistance providers with the goal of building the pipeline of technical assistance to make that available starting later this summer to communities that need it. So this is $100 million available to technical assistance providers. What I may do, Jill and Alana and others, if this is okay, is at the end of my presentation, I'll drop a few links into the chat, just so that way you all have it, and I'll share the link to this opportunity. And this is really going to help EPA expand our ability to provide technical assistance in partnership with the states to communities that need it. We're not building this from scratch for technical assistance, but we need a lot more technical assistance than what we have available today. And so that's why this $100 million opportunity is so important. As we speak, and this gets to the next update, states are in the process of submitting their first request to EPA for their bill allocation, or their bipartisan infrastructure law water funding allocation for their first year. And the representative from Eagle, I imagine, will share some more about that. But this process is being replicated across the 50 states, where states are working right now on their what's called their intended use plan, and working towards submitting their first funding request to EPA. And then lastly, and we can move to the next slide, but lastly, EPA is in the process of rolling out new technical assistance to communities in partnership with the states. So a few things to know about this, just to plant the seeds. So just to start, although I know this audience knows this, there is enormous need across the country for technical assistance to help communities access each state's state revolving fund program. And in some cases, communities need maybe a very specific type of assistance, but we also know that there are many communities that are going to need start to finish support. And by start to finish support, I mean helping those communities understand what are their challenges around water infrastructure, helping those communities conduct the necessary engineering and technical project design and studies, helping make sure that the community, so more than just the utility, although that's important, but community members and community stakeholders can be part of the process. All of that will lead to hopefully many, many more communities across the country submitting funding applications to the state revolving program so that they can get a piece of this bipartisan infrastructure law water funding. So that's the need. The goal from an EPA standpoint is for EPA to leverage the new resources we have to, in partnership with the states, the tribes, and the tribal nations, to expand the overall availability of technical assistance. So there's some technical assistance available right now through the states, and EPA also provides some level of technical assistance. We want to grow and scale that level of technical assistance so that communities can get the assistance they need. So just one thing for you all to be aware of right now is that EPA is having conversations with each state to explore what are ways that with the resources, the new resources EPA has, what can we do to augment each state's efforts, and how can we make sure that we're meeting the needs of communities? So those conversations are ongoing, but a couple focuses that we want to work towards as we move into the second half of the year, as we take our first steps around technical assistance, are one, again, making sure that we're supporting communities to develop SRF applications. Two, to really see how we can target technical assistance to accelerate the removal of lead service lines. And then three, we really want to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that so many families and households across the country are served by decentralized infrastructure. In fact, by some estimates, up to 20% of households are served not by a centralized wastewater system, but by a septic or some other on-site system. So really important that we make sure we meet those needs. And the timeline for EPA to start rolling out our technical assistance in partnership with states is beginning later this summer. You'll start to see some announcements into the fall. A couple other things to say on technical assistance. When EPA talks about technical assistance, we mean both engineering technical assistance, but also community engagement technical assistance. So we need both of those to make progress. And then lastly, it's really important, I'll keep coming back to this, because the state revolving fund program is implemented at the state level. EPA really wants to make sure that we're partnering with the states, that we're not duplicating state efforts, but that we're bringing in resources to augment and complement what states are doing. So for the Eagle colleagues that are on the line, our regional folks are in touch with you as we speak, and hopefully we can really work together to expand the technical assistance available to communities. All right, so I'm almost out of time. So if we go to the next slide, a couple of opportunities to learn more that I want to leave with you. The first is that we are going to hold a webinar in July 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to do a deeper dive, almost like a 101 on this water infrastructure funding opportunity provided through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So an announcement is going to go out widely here pretty soon, but I'm going to drop a link to register into the chat when I wrap up so that you all have access to it. Please attend if you can. If you can't make it, it'll be recorded. Please also share it with your networks and help us spread the word. All right, next slide. A couple other important links, and I'm going to put these in chat when I wrap up. So epa.gov/infrastructure, bookmark that link. There's a lot of good resources there. I'm going to highlight a couple in a minute. The other is epa.gov/water finance center. So I'm going to drop both of those links in the chat. But if we go to the next slide, one resource on the epa.gov/infrastructure is this implementation memorandum that I talked about that we released in March. I really encourage all of you, take a look at the memorandum. You can see the first page on the left, but we also have a fact sheet that's a little more digestible and friendly on the right. That's available online. And then we also have a webinar that's recorded that you can watch. So this is a really good resource to learn more about the process as we move forward. If we go to the next slide, and this gets to the other website I mentioned, the epa.gov/water finance center. There are so many good resources that are educational that are available on this website. But one that I want to emphasize for now, it's a little hard to see, but there's a red circle on the lower left-hand side that leads you to our Water Finance Clearinghouse. If we go to the next slide, this Water Finance Clearinghouse has some educational resources. This is what the page looks like. And then if you click on, again, it's a little hard to see, but that next red circle, learning modules. And if we go to the next slide, there is a SRF 101 learning module. This is a really good educational resource to just learn more about how the SRF or State Revolving Fund program works. So I'm going to drop the link to that in the chat. We're working to update this learning module so it doesn't talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law yet. It hopefully will soon, but it does give you a good overview of how the program works. And then lastly, if we go to the next and last slide, we have a map on our website that you can click on each state to learn how much funding is flowing to each state through the bipartisan infrastructure law water funding. So this is just a nice sort of cheat sheet for you to know how much funding is going to each state. And I'll put a link to that in the chat. So with that, these are just some examples of resources that we have available. We're putting out more resources as we move into the second half of the year. We really want to just recognize that this is going to take all of us to implement. So thank you for being here. All of you have a role to play. I'm happy to take questions now. I'm happy to come back. Jill can keep inviting me. And together we're going to take a big step forward for the communities that need this funding. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great information. I'm so glad to hear that the technical assistance will include community engagement. That is really good to hear. I do want to give folks a chance to ask questions, and you can put them in the chat if you like, and we'll read them off for you, but you can also raise your hand and unmute yourself. And so I already see Commissioner Mary Alice Adams has her hand raised. So Commissioner, please ask your question.
And thank you, Jill, and thank you, Jonathan. I really appreciate you this morning. You've touched base on a lot of questions that I have, because I have more than one. I guess you're the next best thing to the Secretary himself, Pete Buttigieg. So with that being said, we seem to have a problem with not community engagement, but political politics getting in the way of things happening. And I think sometimes states sometimes overstep their boundaries for political reasons. And there's so much oversight that needs to go on that community engagement is needed. And I often hear people say, follow the money. So in following the money, it would take those community people that are engaging or trying to, that's not left out of the process, which is happening in my hometown of Benton Harbor. More oversight is needed, because had that happened, we probably wouldn't be in as bad a shape as we are. So with that being said, what is the probability of this, the federal government having someone to do exactly that, follow the money, and making sure that the community is basically engaged in what's going on? Like, we have a water council that has drawn so much attention to this thing with our lead lines. So I just want your thoughts on that. I want to also know if, in fact, being a distress, one of those distressed communities, the poorest of the poor, this community has had to incur so many costs by bonds and loans that people can't afford. Everybody knows the differentiation between the two twin cities of Benton Harbor and St. Joe, and the income levels. And people are having to incur these costs for larger water bills, for this bond, for that millage, or, I mean, how can these dollars help us, and can these past bonds be forgiven? I know I gave you a lot.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah,
I'll let Jonathan dig in where he can.
Yeah, these are good questions, Commissioner. And I just want to take a moment to express, so for the public servants that are on the line, Commissioner, this definitely includes you. This also includes the representatives from the state. Like, this is a moment, and this goes back to where I started, where there's a lot of excitement, and this is a moment that's stretching all of us. This is a challenging moment, and we at EPA really want to do everything we can to be a good partner at every level, because we're asking a lot of the states, and we're asking a lot of communities. When we say communities need to participate, I think it's important to recognize, and I know you all know this, but you know, a community member has a lot on their own plate, and they're experiencing many different types of burdens, and they're typically don't have the same resources that many of us have the privilege of having. So I want to start there just by acknowledging all of that. What I'll also say, Commissioner, and I'm going to put my email in the chat so everyone has access to it, but I welcome the opportunity to follow up one-on-one and just better understand from your perspective, what are the challenges and how can EPA be a good partner? The last thing I'll say, just on the note of accountability, is there's, for us, there's a couple ways that we're looking at this. The one way we're looking at this is Congress is going to hold us accountable to implement this funding well. So EPA is going to be held accountable, and the public, of course, is going to hold us accountable. And we take that very, very, very seriously. What the other way to look at this, and we think both are equally true, is what can we do proactively in partnership with communities, with utilities, and with states to lean in, recognizing that we've just got more resources now than we've ever had before. So we're in a different place of opportunity. And we want to feel positive about that, but we also know that we need to do things differently if we're going to get different outcomes. And so I think that's why I really am happy to connect offline, one-on-one, certainly with you, Commissioner. I'll put my email in the chat. And then for the state folks and other public servants that are on the line, we recognize that this is a moment that's asking a lot of you, and there's a lot of incoming from a lot of different directions. So if there are things that EPA can do to be a good partner, we welcome that. And then we're going to, of course, be held accountable, and we're going to have to give a report on how we're doing, and which is why we want to lean in now so we can get it right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great. I don't see any other questions at this time. So thank you again for your time and making all of this information available and making yourself so accessible to participants, Jonathan. Really appreciate it.
Jill,
oh yeah,
Reverend Pinckney here.
Reverend.
Yes. I do have a question for Jonathan.
Okay.
Just knowing what happened here in the city of Benton Harbor, I would like maybe to help him so they could be, the EPA could be a little bit more proactive to prevent this from happening in any other city around the country, because anytime that I know that you got lead pipes, most likely you got lead in the water. So I think that when a red flag come up, the EPA, and here in Michigan we have Eagle, they should pounce on it right away. They, like they waited more than 3 years, close to 4 years in the city of Benton Harbor for any solution to come about. But I think anytime, let's say with the first cycle, like in every 6 month cycle that you have, and a red flag come up, I think that at that time we should be dealing with it and making sure that that it never happened again. Maybe you can give me some advice on that, on how you can deal with it proactively, and that would be good for me.
Thank you, Reverend.
Yeah, thank you, Reverend. I'll keep it simple, and then I'm happy to follow up. If any community that is experiencing what Benton Harbor is experiencing is a community where we need to do more. And until we make sure that everyone in this country has access to safe, clean, and affordable water, our work isn't done, and we're not doing enough. Now, we're human beings, so we always need to keep learning how to do better. And we also can only do as much as we have the resources. So I think part of what I want to end on a note of optimism is we've got more resources right now. How we use them is what we need to be held accountable to. And so I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation with you. And thank you for the work you're doing, because you did elevate the issue, and the country is watching now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And you can put your email in there. I can get it from Jill, and I get your email, and we'll talk and see what we can set up and talk about.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Reverend, and thank you again so much, Jonathan. And in the interest—
hey, Jonathan, Jonathan, this is Michael Harris from Flint. I just want to let you know, the great work you're doing, and our buddy Radical Fox, who is a great friend of ours. We truly miss her. And, you know, she's my ex-girlfriend. In my mind, we used to date, even though we didn't. She left me for some guy named Michael Regan at the EPA or something. So just tell her I miss her. We miss her, we love her, we're proud of her. And by extension, we're proud of what you're doing.
I'll pass that along. She'll appreciate that. And you know, this has taken all of us, state, community, EPA. You know, we're all just people. And it's stretching all of us to I think our limits. And so I want to just say thank you to all of you, every single person on this line, the work you're doing. This is hard work. And we're not done until everyone's got the infrastructure they deserve. So we've got our work cut out for us. Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jonathan. All right. Well, we're moving along pretty much right on time. So I'm going to move us to our next introduction. Thank you for the great questions. And to introduce our next speaker, I'm going to call on Commissioner Mary Alice Adams. She is the president and CEO of Project Need Foundation. Mary Alice.
And thank you, Jill. I really appreciate Freshwater Future for even coming into my life. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to present our next speakers. And next up, we'll have Mr. Eric Pecan, Michigan Department of Environmental Great Lakes and Energy. Eric serves as the environmental manager for the West Unit Program Management Team with Water Infrastructure Financing section located within the Finance Division of the Michigan Department of Environmental Great Lakes and Energy, which is EAGLE. He supervises staff that administers the State Revolving Fund, SRF, low interest loan programs that includes the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, as well as a stormwater asset management and wastewater grant loan program and other financing and funding programs related to the construction of water pollution control and drinking water projects. Eric has served in a variety of roles within the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality and EAGLE since 2004, including his current role since July of 2021. Eric spent 14 years as project manager, senior environmental quality analysis, and state revolving loan specialist, assisting municipalities across the state of Michigan qualify for and receive over $680 million in loans and grants for the planning, design, and construction of drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. And next behind Mr. Pecan, we'll have his supervisor, which is Paul McDonald, Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. Paul has served in a wide variety of finance roles for the state of Michigan since 1998, including current role since 2015. Paul started his career in the Office of Financial Management, where he was responsible for creating the state of Michigan's financial statements, as well as the first financial transparency portal. Before joining EAGLE, he served as the chief accountant for the Department of Health and Human Services, responsible for more than $15 billion in revenue and expenditures. And without further ado, I introduce to you all Eric Pecan.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to try to share this presentation here. Okay, thanks a lot. Yep, my name is Eric Pecan, and I'm with the Water Infrastructure Financing section within EAGLE. And So just kind of want to, we're kind of the next step. So, you know, Jonathan from EPA, he talked a little bit about the financing that was available at the federal level. And so, you know, our financing is now once we get to the state level. So here's got a little contact information here if anyone needs to get a hold of me, either by phone or email. So we have two main programs within the water infrastructure financing section. We have both the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So just to give you a little bit of background, in Michigan, the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund started in 1998. We receive approximately $25 to $30 million annually of federal funding from EPA. Now, of those dollars, a 20% state match is required. In our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund can support up to about $200 million worth of drinking water projects each year. And we've financed about $1.5 billion worth of projects, which is around 345 projects since the beginning of the program. Our other fund is the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. It's a little bit older, so that began in 1988. We receive between 65 and $70 million of federal funds annually. That program also requires a 20% state match. We're able to support about $800 million worth of loans in that program. And to date, we've financed over $5.4 billion worth of projects since the program began. So first we'll talk about the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Applicants that are eligible for this fund are community water suppliers and nonprofit, non-community water suppliers. Here's some of the eligible projects that are financed by our program. You know, pretty much from the intake to the house, there are eligible items. So intake structures, pump stations and storage tanks, water treatment plants, pipelines, lead and galvanized water services, wells and well structures, as well as security and SCADA, you know, information. The Clean Water State Revolving Fund, the applicants for that fund are publicly owned treatment works or non-point source pollution control projects. So eligible items for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund are wastewater treatment facility upgrades or expansion, combined or sanitary sewer overflow abatement, collection system improvements and installation, and non-point source pollution reduction. So going the wrong way. So eligible items for a clean water or a drinking water state revolving fund, in addition to the construction items that we finance, we also finance project planning costs, design and construction engineering, legal and financial services. You know, the construction costs, which currently are required to have Davis-Bacon wage rates, American Iron and Steel, and then for some people that have been kind of keeping track, we're also going to have some BABA requirements, Build American, Buy American, coming into the program. We also cover administration costs, land acquisition and easements, and up to $2 million to develop or expand asset management plans when you're doing an eligible project. So some ineligible items for the state revolving fund would be oversized project components beyond the 20-year needs, site restoration beyond a return to pre-existing conditions, privately owned service lines that are not a public health threat, other work not related to a specific goal of the project, and then if the primary purpose of the expansion is expansion or fire protection. Those items would not be eligible for the state revolving fund. So some of the advantages that communities and applicants have coming through the state revolving fund is there's multiple loan terms as well as low interest rates. So for fiscal year 22, for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, we have 20 and 30-year loan options, with a 20-year loan being 1.875% interest and a 30-year being 2.125% interest. And then also for disadvantaged communities on the drinking water side, we also have a 40-year loan term, and that 40-year loan term gets those communities that lower interest rate at 1.875%. So the state revolving fund also has loan principal forgiveness. And so, you know, Jonathan had talked earlier about the bill funds. And so we have the bill funds and then some traditional funds through the state revolving fund. So we target for principal forgiveness disadvantaged communities, those projects that are handling emerging contaminants like PFAS, as well as lead service line replacement. So pretty much, yeah, the community will get a loan, and then either a portion or all of that loan, because they have principal forgiveness, wouldn't have to make payments on whatever portion of the loan has principal forgiveness. So that's a great deal for not only disadvantaged communities in our state, but also communities that are trying to get rid of PFAS or lead pipes in their system. So the big thing is, you know, we always get the question, how do we apply? So we have an intent to apply form on our website that for fiscal year 24 consideration will be due on November 1st of 2022. So currently we're financing projects in the fiscal year 22 section. We are receiving or have received most of the project plans for projects that are going to be financed in 2023. So for communities that aren't in our program yet, the next funding or financing opportunity would be for fiscal year 24. So communities will submit an intent to apply form by November 1st of 22 in order to kind of get in the queue for that funding. On our website, we have an intent to apply link. So you can go to michigan.gov/CWSRF or DWSRF, and there'll be a link there. We have made some recent updates. Last year, those forms are due in January. This year, to give communities a little more time to put project plans together, we've moved that up to November. So we're trying to give communities a little bit more time to plan for their projects. So what happens when a community submits an intent to apply form? Well, they'll be assigned a project manager at Eagle and WIFs, and that project manager is going to reach out to the community and set up a pre-application meeting. So the pre-application meeting is there to answer questions about the proposed project, about how to submit a successful application to the state revolving fund. We include our project managers, a district engineer, the community and their consultant are usually on those calls. And it just kind of, it's like an intro. So we're able to learn about the proposed project and then also help the community proceed to a successful application. So project plans are due for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund on June 1st of each year. The Drinking Water State Revolving Fund project plans are due July 1st. And so once that ITA gets kicked off and community has a project manager, we're able to, we have a lot of guidance that we're able to give to communities. The project manager and the district engineer are able to comment on draft project plans. That way, when that final plan is submitted either June 1st or July 1st, you know, it's eligible to be ranked on our project priority list. So that project plan that's due in either June or July, depending on what fund the community is applying for, has kind of 6 components. So in that project plan, communities are looking at the project background and alternative analysis. So what's the problem? And there may be like multiple ways to solve that problem. So we want to look at each one of those feasible alternatives. And then we'll look at, which one of those methods is the most cost effective. And that's how a community will select their alternative. So that'll be part of the project plan. Communities also look at environmental impacts as a result of the project, how they're going to mitigate those impacts. And then there's also a public participation section of the project plan. Each project is going to have a 30-day public notice, as well as a public hearing, so the community can explain the plan to the public and then take any comments from the public as a result of that plan. So here's a little snapshot of what we're looking at for need in fiscal year 23 for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So we went through the ITA process earlier this year. We received over $602 million worth of projects that submitted intent to applies. And then we also had carryover projects. So when those project plans come in, they're good for 5 years. And some communities will have multi-year projects. So they won't have just one loan. They could have up to 5 loans as part of one plan. So for fiscal year 23, we also had $554 million of carryover projects. And so as you can see, the need is really large right now for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Just a couple of years ago, the need was only, 20, 30, $40 million range. And now the need is over $1.1 billion just in the state of Michigan. So infrastructure is definitely on everybody's mind right now, and communities across the state understand the importance of getting those projects done. So we're at historic levels of need for infrastructure. So we have over $1.1 billion worth of requests. However, I think I talked earlier about what kind of dollars that we get from EPA from our capitalization grant. And so this chart shows how much funding is available in fiscal year 23 for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. So our traditional dollars is we have $125 million available. You heard Jonathan talk earlier about the bill law that was passed. And so that's been great for us, because what that does is it adds an additional $44 million to Michigan's general fund, as well as $18.5 million for emerging contaminant PFAS type projects. And then we're getting an additional $69 million to target lead service line removal. So we're going to have a fundable range this year of about $256 million. And then in this column, you'll see we have over $91 million of those funds are going to be offered at principal forgiveness. So those are going to be loans that don't have to be paid back by communities. So $256 million, $91 million will be forgiven. That's going to be a large help to communities across the state. And I know we talked about disadvantaged communities. So this principal forgiveness, this $38.5 million in principal forgiveness, that's going to be targeted directly towards disadvantaged communities. So for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, as I said earlier, the program's been around longer. So we have like a larger capacity for funding for that fund, but we also get more applications as well. So this year we got almost $1.4 billion in applications for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We had another $350 million of carryover projects. So the need on the clean water side is over $1.7 billion in Michigan this year. So the good news is our fund is a lot larger on the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. So we have $800 million of traditional dollars. We're receiving an additional $77 million from the bill money that's coming from the federal government. We also have $4 million for emerging contaminants. So good news is we have $881 million available for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And then out of that, $68.3 million is going to be offered as principal forgiveness. So we have a pretty high fundable range this year for Clean Water SRF. It's the highest that we've ever had in the program's history. Unfortunately, this might be the first year that we're not able to finance all of the projects in the Clean Water State Revolving Fund just because the need is so great across the state. But we do have some additional news to share. So the ARPA dollars that were made available with Public Act 53, the state of Michigan is going to transfer over $1 billion of the state ARPA funds into the state revolving fund. So we're going to get $600 million for drinking water and $400 million for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. And so these numbers are over 2 years. So for fiscal year 23 and 24, we'll have these dollars. So there'll be $300 million in drinking water money available in 23, and then another 324. And so same thing on clean water, we'll have an additional $200 million for 23, with $200 million going to 24. So, we had about $250 million for drinking water. So we'll be able to add an additional 300 million. So that'll get our capacity up to, over $500 million for 23. And then, we'll be close to $1 billion in clean water for fiscal year 23. So these dollars are also going to be targeted towards disadvantaged communities. So there's going to be some really great opportunities over the next 2 years for disadvantaged communities that are involved in the state revolving fund. There's going to be significant, principal forgiveness or possibly grant funding through ARPA. So just a little bit about, how we look at disadvantaged communities. Currently, we do have some legislation changes coming in Michigan. So some of this may change like going forward, but currently disadvantaged communities are defined in statute in part 53 and 54. And some of the calculation factors that go into determining if a community is disadvantaged or not is median household income, operation and maintenance costs, and debt. So, but we do expect some changes to that calculation probably going forward with some of these legislation changes. So just some SRF dates to know. November 1st is when the intent to apply form is due. June 1st is our project plan deadline for clean water, July 1st for the drinking water state revolving fund. And then in mid-August, we release a draft intended use plan and project priority list. And so each project that comes in gets ranked based on a scoring system and is basically ranked from 1 down to whatever, the lowest scoring project is. And pretty much we just take the funding and go right down the list and fund as many projects as we can. By the end of September, early October is when we finalize that project priority list and intended use plan. And that's when we're able to let communities know which communities are in the fundable range, and how much principal forgiveness that they can expect for that fiscal year. So here again is just some information on the program and some contact information if you have any questions. So I guess, so that's it. So Jill, I don't know if you want to open it up for questions.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much, Eric, for that great presentation. And we have a few minutes for questions again. And then we will move to our next speaker. I see Commissioner Adams has her hand up. And again, you can raise your hand or you can also put something in the chat. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Eric. And please forgive me for the mispronunciation of your name.
No, that's
Please
okay.
forgive me. Whose responsibility is it to apply for the funding, and who can apply for their community? And go ahead.
Yeah, so the water suppliers are the ones that that would be the applicant. So in the slideshow, I had a couple of slides of who is eligible for the program. So those would be the entities that would apply for the program.
Okay, but I guess I asked that question because I was listening to you and I was relating back to the previous speaker, Jonathan.
Yeah.
And I just keep thinking community engagement. So it's not our planning and economic development department that would apply for these grants. And
right, I mean, usually the contacts that we have are, you know, officials with the municipality, whether it be like the public works department or you know, maybe the mayor. Those are usually the contacts that we have within the community. But definitely, as far as community engagement, if there's somebody on this call that says, hey, this would be a great, you know, way for my community to finance a project, yeah, get involved, go to council meetings, you know, bring up the state revolving fund as a solution to some of the issues.
okay, I guess in my mind, I have to differentiate some things, but again, it just takes me back to oversight of different things that take place in a community that the taxpaying residents are incurring costs for, but yet have no say so. Just like we passed did a $5 million bond through the city's 40-year-old engineer. And now the residents, they can't utilize their drinking water, is having to incur the cost of a water rate hike. I mean, and something is just very wrong with that picture in the order in which things seem to be done. And if we don't have these conversations, we won't know how to fix things to where they work for the people of America to keep these type of things going.
Sure, I agree, and yeah, there is a public you know, engagement portion of the state revolving fund. Before that official project plan is submitted, there has to be a 30-day public notice on the project, and then there's also a presentation of that project plan. And so as part of that presentation, they are required to talk about rates and rate impact. So that's something that the community will be able to make comments on before that project is submitted. So there are some areas for engagement. And then, like I also mentioned too, you know, is that we have some great opportunities for principal forgiveness and grants going forward, which, you know, would definitely lower the impact of these projects, you know, to the resident.
So would that apply to the $5 million bond that the city incurred, and now the residents are having to deal with a rate hike? Is that something that could become forgivable with all of the funding that Jonathan spoke of and those that you speak of now?
I think are you referring to just like to previous bonds?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, we would be financing projects, you know, new projects. So we don't do refinances within our program, but you know, moving forward with projects that they're going to present and do in the future, that's what we'd be looking at.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can jump in here, Eric, a little bit. Good morning, everyone. Paul McDonald. Commissioner, to your point on public engagement, you know, Eric touched off or discussed about the municipality's requirement, and that's an EPA requirement of the SRF program, to engage the public, provide 30-day notice, have a hearing, take comments. There is also a requirement, and this is where Eric will have to help me because he's more in tune with the details. I'm just well enough aware to know it's there, but there is also a part of our process where we do an environmental assessment that includes and I'm trying to remember the specific words and don't have it memorized, and I think that's a good thing, but significant public concern over a project. So, if that hearing occurs and there's significant public concern, that's taken into consideration as far as Eagle's review of the project underneath the SRF program. And there is the potential that if there's significant public concern, that the project could be halted or stopped. Or let me rephrase, could fall out of the fundable range and not be able to move forward with the SRF project. And the reason I bring that up, and I don't know specifically the $5 million bond that you're referring to, if it's tied to the SRF or if it's independent, but that kind of all falls in line with that process, right? So if the municipality is identifying the need to take out a bond for a project, and that is something the concerned citizens have, that would be part of that whole review process. So I'll pause there. I see Eric shaking his head up and down and not freaking out that I said anything wrong, but give him a moment to correct me if I've misspoken.
No, Paul's correct. So yeah, each project we publish an environmental assessment showing that there's no finding of no significant impact. So yeah, like Paul said, if there is a significant impact, such as rate or environmental impact, potentially we wouldn't be able to issue that document. The other thing too is that document is made public, and that's another chance for the community to comment on the project. So when we have that hearing on the project plan before it's submitted, there's like a sign-in sheet for each community, and residents are able to like put their name down, their address, their email, and then if there is participation there, we would also send a copy of that document to anyone who signs into that meeting, so we can kind of keep you involved in that project, from the planning right up to the construction.
I really appreciate that.
Commissioner, I need to move us on.
Okay, and I'll get back with him later. Hopefully I can, have an outside conversation about it. Thank you.
And I just want to also say to everybody on the call that Freshwater Future has recognized, and so is All About Water, the fact that these community processes, the public engagement, quote unquote, that happens doesn't always reach everyone. Sometimes it doesn't reach many. And so one of the things that we'll be talking about a little later in this call, and that we'll be giving you some information on, is we have some tools for helping you do engagement with the community in addition to what the city may do. And then also we have some funds available for that work. So we'll be making some grants to help get people engaged and help them understand these projects, and even bring up project ideas. So great questions. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate Eric and Paul, your responses and your presentation. It was very helpful. Thank you again for your time and effort to be here today. All right. So with that, I'm going to move us on to our next speaker. Actually, I'll introduce Michael Harris. He is another member of our All About Water Steering Committee, and he is with the Flint Community Water Lab, and he is going to do our next introduction. Mike, please.
Yep. Thank you, Jill. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Jason Cole, what can we say about Jason? Jason is the executive director of the Michigan Minority Contractors Association. He has more than 35 years of experience in commercial development, construction, and real estate industry. He's an expert in human resources, finance, marketing, and sales. He also does commercial real estate and lending and investment. I'm gonna have to hit Jason up for a loan later. He works with a number of organizations advocating for minority groups, including Real Estate Investor Association Detroit chapter. He works with the National Association of Minority Consultants and Engineers. He works with the Detroit Association of Planners, the National Association of Black Women in Construction, and the National Organization of Minority Architects. he also works with the Detroit Association of Realtors. All that is Detroit born, Detroit bred, and I'm sure Jason is proud of Detroit. He's also the National Association of Black Owners and Operators development person. He works with them also. I present to you, everyone, the illustrious Jason Cole. Jason?
Thank you for that dynamic introduction. Holy smokes, I got to live up to that. All right, so I don't know who's controlling the slides. First, let me apologize to everyone for the background noise. I'm actually in a development conference as we speak. I'm doing a little development here in the city of Detroit on 6 Mile and LaSalle. If anybody knows Detroit, on the northwest side of Martin Park. So you may see people in my background. My apologies. I overbooked myself. As if you couldn't already tell, I'm trying to be an overachiever later in life. So first and foremost, Jason Cole, all the associations are real and robust, but at the end of the day, I'm most known for starting the Michigan Minority Contractors Association in 2012. And then I ended up in a prior life working for my mother for 20 years, doing governmental contracting. And for about 90 days, I actually worked for the federal government in the Small Business Administration, doing loan initiations for African Americans. Yes, my job title was that specific. Next slide. So here's kind of the table of contents run of show. We're going to assess, train, resources, deploy, engage, educate, and elevate the profession. A big piece of what I'm not seeing still in the marketplace is just a highlighting of how important water is, both freshwater, wastewater. I've been in that industry literally since 1988, and it's our lifeblood. It's not really blood, but it's our lifeblood. Next slide. So how do you go about assessing what needs to take place? You've got EPA's Energy Star program. The Department of Labor has a 21st Century Apprenticeship program initiative going on. They're trying to get more folks who are subject matter experts to take their knowledge, turn it into curriculum, and then get it kind of legitimate so that it can not only be a local certification, but actually a national certification. So get a body to proctor exams and take students, pupils, cohorts, whatever you want to call them, through a process so they have learned experience, either in class or in a learning lab. And so the state of Michigan is already doing some things, like their Sustainable Education Economic Development Center and their MyTech. Those programs have been going on for a while. They're again, not a whole lot of spotlight to them, but it's a way for you to have your communities get an understanding of what's taking place and getting young folks engaged in the process. Next slide. All right, so where's training at? I partner up with a training school. It's actually a church that has 6 training classrooms around it. And it's right in Brightmoor, which is a very challenging neighborhood here in Detroit. And the young man is a 40-year carpenter, but he's also a pastor of a church. So you get a little bit of both. He tries to keep them separated because that's what the state charter makes him do. But at the end of the day, it's a really dynamic place to get education. Also partner with folks on the east side of Detroit. They're in District 4. It's the Emerging Industries Training Institute. They used to be downtown. Now they're in the Samaritan Center, if you know anything about the east side of Detroit, kind of Warren and Connor, and one of those districts that need a lot of support. There are some communities in Detroit that are a little bit better off than others, and that one definitely is challenged. The other thing that's taking place is you have the ability to augment, bring in technology, because not everybody wants to sit in a class, not everybody learns that way. So you can have experiential-based training. You can actually see the problem in real time and kind of 360 diagram, go through it. And the kids are really picking up to that, right? I'm 52, so I'm a couple generations back. But your Z's and Gen Y's, and yeah, I can't even keep up with them all. But those kids really are into that, and they want to learn on their phones. They're always in their hands up until the point they need to actually focus in on the project in front of them. Another piece to the puzzle is, again, going back to a previous slide, once you've got some technology, some learned experience, get it designated for certification across the country, and places like the American Water Works Association and the Water Environment Federation are good places to have sounding boards for you to get that done, because again, the only way your communities are going to uplift themselves is get educated. And then one of the things I do for my members is I take them through a capacity building program, kind of a 12-week check mark of, hey, you've got no insurance, we get your insurance, bond, line of credit. Make sure your employees are certified. They know how to do Davis-Bacon prevailing wage, because one of the things I do is not only water, I also do housing and then roads. And so everybody's looking for that stamp of approval that you have learned it, you've been tested on it, and now I can put you out on a public road or public right of way, because at the end of the day, the citizens of this great state of Michigan deserve the best. All right, moving on, next slide. Resources, they are plentiful, but what they are siloed. So what I did, and this slide actually comes from what I previously did with the housing folks and the transportation people, was, hey, everybody's, and I get it, that's where your money comes from, it's siloed, but at the end of the day, people need a kind of a wraparound solution, especially young folks coming into an industry that they probably weren't taught about. So we hit clothing and vehicles and supports. Most communities have a community foundation or a United Way, and so tap into those resources, especially if you're doing something that's innovative, educational, and going to be a critical asset. You as the person, right? Young person, business in the community. We need that here in the state of Michigan. Desperate, desperate. Next slide. More resources. I tell you, the folks in Lansing, people kind of shoot problems their way, and then they come up with okay, okay, all right, we'll talk offline. And so the resources again are siloed, and so Department of Justice money's over here, and HUD's doing something over there, and education's there, and labor's there, and all I'm suggesting is let's get it all together. Click on the links, make sure your community knows what's already there. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes all you got to do is put some spinners on it, right? And so the things this state has done something. I'm not saying we're panacea, we got all the solutions, but at the end of the day, we do have some things in the right direction. And I have sat in a room for north of 8 years, just on getting the future generation into road building. And it has been an uphill process, because folks are set in their ways, especially if you're getting into that generational conversation. And we got to amplify everything. That's the only way we're going to win with this next generation. So as you can see, resources there. Next slide. Let's get employed, right? Another piece to this is I got trained, I got certified, I got my stamp of approval. I need a job. And then where's those job providers at, right? That was a big thing during a former administration, job providers. So these are a couple of organizations. The first one I started, the first two actually I started, the Contractors Association and the Engineers Association. Again, my apologies for the background noise. If I need to mute and cut this short, let me know. But the other thing that I have found that there are people at the table who want to help the state administration, government, the powers that be, get more done. So you have willing partners on both sides of the table, and that's new. That wasn't always the case. So we're moving into a new era here in the state of Michigan, and I am fired up. If you didn't already know, our former governor now runs the Department of Energy. That's unheard of. Unfortunately, she can't run for president because she was born in Canada, but at the end of the day, we now have powerful people at secretary level for more dollars and more opportunities to come to the state of Michigan. And here in Detroit, Biden happens to be a big fan of another Irish fellow by the name of Michael Edward. All right, next slide. government contracting. So one of the things I did for my mother's company from 1988 to 2008 was government contracting. So the ins and outs of that are massive and numerous. You can go down some holes, but at the end of the day, if you do about 12 steps kind of succinctly, you will get to the finish line. So a big part of that is just knowing where to start. So my 12 steps, I can share that with everybody, kind of the check marks of what you want to share with your community, especially if folks are new to freshwater, because not everybody knows this industry even exists. How to get plugged into it, how to get pre-qualified, how to get engaged, the powers that be, how the money works, how the money works, how the money works. That's really crucial, right? Not everybody knows what an SRF is. And, you know, you say state revolving fund to a small business, they're like, speaking. So that's really, really important. I spend a great deal of time in that money space as people ask me for loans. Come on, money. I just got resources that point you in the right direction. Next slide. Getting engaged, right? So programs already exist for your future workforce. I don't know if everybody's tapping into them. Department of Justice, through our Michigan Department of Corrections, has a vocation village. Oddly enough, it's on the west side of the state, where most of the folks probably came from the east side of the state, but that's politics. I'm trying to stay away from that. But so there's kind of a construction school embedded into our correction department. And more needs to be done to get one of those on the east side of the state where the population is from. But again, that's above my pay grade. Department of Labor has Job Corps, EPA has this Environmental Justice Initiative. That's a link to pop onto. And I believe Biden's executive order is 13958. 48. And so that's a big kind of linchpin to what they're pushing out across the country. And then lastly, or the last 2 points are, if you're a 501c3, you can respond to a proposal. There's normally a youth build in your community. And if there isn't one, you need to be talking to your federal rep about getting one in your community, or at least close by. It's not in your domicile community. That's a really big piece to that pipeline of folks that need to get trained up. And then lastly, AmeriCorps is a great training program. That's more learning lab, because they they want those kids engaged in communities day one. They don't want them sitting in classrooms. Like, no, go learn that in real time in the community. Next slide. The education part is so critical, because even as I look at this, these job titles, I couldn't tell you what everything is involved in them. All I remember was this was a running joke. There's a job title within the Detroit Water and Sewage Department called a grit chamber operator. The joke was you got paid 60 grand, but you could take home about 100,000. Meaning whatever came through the grit chamber, you could just pick up. And a lot of things get flushed down toilets. Don't ask, it's wastewater duty. But at the end of the day, we don't even know what's involved in it. We've not seen it. No one in our family is engaged in it. And that's kind of how, that next generation pipeline will come together, is they got to have a clear understanding of what's involved. So I tell people micro and dirty jobs, that's on PBS. I believe those are banked. So you can actually just kind of pull that into your public works department's website and let folks know what the future looks like. It's not as horrible. And we got bass, people. Come on, let's get engaged. Let's get engaged. So there are a couple of the hot job titles that I pulled that from the Water Environmental Federation's technology platform, and those are going to be in-demand jobs for the foreseeable future. You just got attrition, new technology, and all of it comes together, and hot new opportunities for your communities now. Right, next slide. Thank you, Ann. All right, elevated, right? Folks just don't know that this exists. I can tell you in Detroit, we have a very large wastewater treatment plant. And as I was told by engineers, consulting engineers who were professional engineers, they claimed that's the smell of money burning. And so, which has a stench to it, but more importantly, just have an understanding of what it means for fresh water to come out the tap. Not everybody even knows that process. And why would they, right? But once you get educated on it, you get a little pride about it. I know I've been, I've said this more than once, that we have the best tasting water in North America. I learned that at like 23. It's stuck in my head now 30 years later. So another piece to this, beyond community pride, is to collaborate. And so the way that normally happens is through a mentor-protege relationship. And that's called, in the construction space where I kind of get my bread and butter, it's the simple plan that was started by an organization that was started more than 100 years ago, called the Associated General Contractors. They use this platform called the Simple Plan. It was literally invented by a guy, and about 6 months later he passed away. Great man. And it's also supported by the United Way. So this, if you haven't heard of the Simple Plan, research it, get it in your community. It's a great way to link up larger contractors and smaller contractors who will be working on those projects in your city. All this money is coming forward, and a bunch of work needs to take place to take out old pipes, put in new pipes, and a lot of our infrastructure is just old. So, them, and then ABE, that's the builder exchange where you're going to get your supply from. Because at the end of the day, not everybody owns a pipe plant. They got to get over to the supply house. And then NUCA, the National Underground Contractors Association, those are the folks who really drive the decision at that contracting level, from supply to workers to getting those projects done. And so if anybody is new to this, please go by their website and have anybody in your community get engaged at that point. Next slide. Involving young people, just again, Dirty Jobs, which is on PBS, but you've now got training programs kind of emerging at Project Wet, which I believe is out of USDA, right? And then you've got that's kind of K through 12 and post high school. You got the Water Environment Federation. I believe they're in Bath, Michigan, locally here outside of Lansing. Those folks, I've talked to them in the past. They're very open because they know how much attrition is coming to their ranks, and they need new folks to engage. And then once you get in and maybe you want to shine, there's actually a place for you to kind of hone your leadership skills. And then the last piece is your community colleges. Just overlooked because everybody goes to the 4-year, they're bigger, and folks know their names, but your community colleges are going to be huge staples for backfilling all of those job openings. Great training locations, most communities have them, and they're just overlooked. So I encourage everybody to take a look at those sites. Next slide. My contractor folks, man, how do you break into this stuff? Because you don't know which way is up. For me, you got to start somewhere, right? So I made a decision. EPA is going to be my home. I was around for Hazel O'Leary. That's several EPA directors ago. And just, it was a job imperative, right? That was the way I kept my job working for my mother for 20 years, was get engaged at with the EPA. You don't know where to go. And I made this slide based upon the fact that folks could be from several states on the line. You've got EPA has kind of a finder. So here in Michigan, it's Eagle, right? And then you get down to your train commissions. I mean, it gets fun, folks. So know where to just get on board and into the process. Okay, I'll take a look at that. Yeah, drain commission. So not everybody is just named the water department, right? Could be public works, could be drain commission, could be numerous names. And so at the end of the day, those are the governmental pieces. Then there's the private sector or association, trade association on ramps. I'm a huge supporter of associations. You didn't hear from my early bio. 1, I'm a member of 20. 2, I've now started 12 associations. I'm a madman, but I knew my community to be connected. Go ahead.
Please begin to make your final remarks.
Will do. All right, next slide. There we go. My contact information. Hot dog. I did it. All right. So if anybody has any questions, you don't get the slides. Literally, my contact information is on the internet.
Wonderful. Jason, I can't thank you enough for working this out with all the other things you had going on, and great information for us to share. And so thank you again. If I don't see any questions right now, so we're going to let you go because I know you're in another meeting at the same time, but thank you very much. We appreciate all that expertise. All right, and that will move us to our next introduction, our final introduction. I will introduce Reverend Edward Pinkney, a great friend and amazing advocate. He is also a steering committee member of All About Water, and he is the president and CEO of the Benton Harbor Community Water Council. Reverend, please.
Jill, it's an honor, just to be here with you guys today. We're out here delivering water, and this is my time, but I had to take time out to make sure that I get the proper introduction for Nicholas Leonard, and he deserved every minute of that. And thank you so much, Jill. You have been a lifesaver to us. Thank you so much. Well, let me talk a little bit about Nick. From 2014 to 2016, Nick worked with the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center as an equal justice worker fellow. His fellowship project focused on providing transitional legal service to individuals, nonprofit corporations, and for-profit business in urban agriculture in Detroit. After transitioning to his role as staff attorney at the conclusion of his fellowship, Nick worked on environmental justice issues in Detroit with a specific focus on Clean Air Act, permitting hazardous solid waste management and local environmental policy. He became the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center Executive Director in 2018. In this role, he supervised the center attorneys and coordinated the organization's legal strategy. And I just want to say to Nick, we here in the city of Benton Harbor truly appreciate you. You're a hero to us because you took the initiative to help to take up this fight. And so far, we're winning this fight, which is the most important thing. And I just want to let you know that the residents of Benton Harbor and the Benton Harbor Community Water Council, we love you so much. And you have really been an asset to us, and really appreciate you. I want you to know that. And at that time, with no further ado, Nicholas Leonard, talk to us. Tell us what you want us to know.
Thanks, Reverend. It's always great. You give the best introductions. So when I saw I was being introduced by you, I was like, oh man, this is going to be something special. So I appreciate you and love you all as well. And it's always been my privilege to do the work that we've done in Benton Harbor. So thanks for hopping on and giving me that intro. I appreciate it. Today I'm going to talk about sort of the community side of what the previous speakers have been talking about state revolving fund programs, and really how you can get involved as advocates in trying to make sure that not only your community is getting the dollars that you need to fund, drinking water systems that are going to provide you with safe water, but also to make sure that that's happening across the state. Because as has been previously mentioned, there's a lot of different there's a lot of money coming into these programs. And so the time is essentially now to make sure that groups are ramping up their advocacy. So let me share my screen real quick and we can get it rolling. Hey, pay no mind to my cat. If you can hear in the background. She's going nuts. All right. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of a very basic framework for the state revolving fund process so that everybody has it, so everybody knows what we're talking about. It essentially starts with Congress appropriating money to the federal SRF program. And I'll circle back to this later in the presentation, but Congress appropriates money through a number of different basically laws. One is sort of the annual Appropriations Act that they pass every year. And then more recently, there's been the big source of money has been Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure bills. It's been commonly referred to. There's also been money coming from, and this was mentioned by the folks at Eagle, from the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA funds. That's more discretionary, so states can use that for a number of different things, including drinking water and wastewater infrastructure projects. In Michigan, the Michigan legislature has, as was previously mentioned, put some of that money into the SRF program. But that's where it all starts, is sort of Congress appropriates money. Sometimes they appropriate it directly to the SRF program. Sometimes they say you can, as with the ARPA money, you can use some of this for the SRF program, but you don't have to. But that's where the starting point is. Once that money comes into the different states' SRF programs, then it's basically up to the states to administer that program in accordance with the really basic requirements in the Safe Drinking Water Act and their annual intended use plan. So I'll circle back to the intended use plan, just wanted to put it up in people's minds up front. The one thing to highlight here is that the requirements in the Safe Drinking Water Act are really basic. There's a lot of flexibility for states. And then in order to obtain those funds, generally local governments will apply to their states each year for loans and grants from the SRF fund that the state manages. So basically here, federal government is primarily responsible for funding SRF programs. States are responsible for administering those SRF programs, so figuring out who gets what money, what the terms of the loans or grants are, that kind of thing. And then the local governments are going to states to apply for those funds. Here's just a brief summary of the SRF funded projects that we've seen in Michigan for 2022. So the first thing to note is that you'll see, and I should specify this is for drinking water state revolving fund projects, is that you'll see there's more municipalities applying than there are monies available. And that you could also see the average cost of the project. You can see the common projects that are listed there as well. Lead service line replacements is a really common one in Michigan, as it is in other states. Water main replacements are really common. Water treatment plant upgrades. And you know, there's a specific reason for that, which I'll get to in a minute. And I should specify here, most of my presentation, pretty much all of my presentation is going to focus on the Safe Drinking Water SRF. I mean, just from time constraints and from a money perspective, it's a bit more of a robust program. A lot of this stuff is applicable also to drinking water or clean water SRF programs, but I just wanted to make that distinction clear for folks. So this gives you just a picture of basically the amount of money that we need as a nation to make sure all water systems are meeting the Safe Drinking Water Act. This is from a Safe Drinking Water Act needs assessment conducted by the EPA in 2021. And so you can see the needs are really robust. We need $472 billion over the next 20 years, or $23 billion per year over the next 20 years. And you can see where we need those costs. Mostly the EPA is estimating we need them for distribution and transmission upgrades, things like replacing service lines, improving water mains, that kind of thing. Water treatment is next, storage, and then source water improvements. And so, you know, going back real quick, you can see where are we getting a lot of projects in Michigan? You know, it's in the distribution system upgrades, and it's in the treatment plant upgrades, which sort of maps on with what the general needs are. This gives you a sense of how well we're meeting that need with the SRF program. You can see in general, we haven't been meeting it very well. This gives you, like, once again, the annual investment needed is about $23.5 billion a year. The annual investment in average over the past few years has been around $1.1 billion a year. That's from those annual appropriations that Congress gives to the drinking water SRF program. So, you know, not really close is the short answer. And that's put local governments in a bit of a quandary, a bit of a problem, because they have to figure out how they're going to make up that need. And so this shows you where local governments, where water systems have turned to for capital investments in their drinking water system. And this is from a community water system survey the EPA conducted in 2006. You can see it's a lot of private borrowing, a little bit as well as from their ratepayers, from revenues. You can see the drinking water SRF program is here at 7%. And so it historically has not been sort of a really robust source of funding for capital investments in drinking water systems. They've needed to turn elsewhere. Now, the first speaker talked a lot about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, so I wanted to mention that real quickly because that changes the picture a bit, and it's why people are really excited about SRF programs and why there's a lot of advocacy around them right now. Basically, I started by saying, Congress has generally appropriate about $1.1 billion per year to the drinking water SRF. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act pumped in an additional $6.14 billion per year over the next 5 years. And so that's a really robust increase. Going back real quick to the annual needs, that means we're brought up to about, closer to 7 or 8 billion, still not, anywhere close to the 23 billion that's estimated as needed, but a drastic increase. And you can see here where that money is going. So 11 billion, roughly 11.7 billion is going to the general drinking water SRF funds for states to distribute as they see fit. 15 billion is basically assigned for lead service line replacements in particular. 4 billion is assigned for addressing PFAS threats in drinking water. It also previously mentioned was the EPA guidance on the state revolving fund and the bipartisan infrastructure law. So I wanted to touch on that briefly here. And then after this, I'm going to get into some key topics that people should be aware of in their when they're advocating for especially low-income communities in their drinking water system. And the EPA really laid out 2 priorities. The first was to provide flexibility to states in implementation of the SRF funding. And really, states here are determining the priorities for funding through scoring criteria. They're designing and managing the application process and what needs to be submitted, what doesn't need to be submitted, and they're setting interest rates and repayment terms. So there's still a lot of flexibility, even under the new guidance, for states to determine how to administer their state revolving fund dollars. The second was priority number 2, which was to increase investment in disadvantaged communities by providing such communities with grants and forgivable loans. However, states still have a lot of flexibility to define what community counts as a disadvantaged community. The EPA is largely stayed out of that conversation. And so as I'm going to talk about it a bit, that's been a key issue in a lot of states, because it does everything from determine who's eligible for principal forgiveness, what kind of interest rates a community is eligible for. So it's a really important definition. And so now I'm going to move into more talking about some of the key topics. And these are things that we've advocated for, the Great Lakes Environmental Law Center, like how we've been involved in this advocacy is really since about 2018, 2019, we've been focusing on submitting comments on Michigan's drinking water state revolving fund intended use plan. So the intended use plan is basically a document that the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, and all other environmental departments that manage SRF programs put out every year. And it describes how they're going to utilize their state revolving fund for that given year. So a lot of, and these are really a lot of the key topics that we've been interested in: scoring criteria, interest rates, subsidies for disadvantaged communities, and in particular, how disadvantaged communities, how that phrase is defined, and lead service line replacements. So I'm going to touch on each of those topics. And then at the end, I'm going to circle to how do you get engaged in your intended use planning process, and sort of what are some things that you can look out for. So I'm going to start with scoring criteria. And once again, I'm just giving you sort of the basics here from the Safe Drinking Water Act. There's not much here, to be honest. Once again, the rule of thumb for state revolving fund programs is the federal law provides a lot of flexibility to state governments, to state agencies, to come up to design their program as they see fit. So once again, these scoring criteria are basically what's used by states to determine the priority for projects. So they'll receive, Michigan receives 70 some project applications. They can't fund them all. They'll go to basically the highest priority projects. And so this scoring criteria is what's used to assign priority to different projects that come in. This is what Michigan's scoring criteria looks like. It's fairly basic. It's fairly straightforward. And you can sort of see there's a maximum of 1,000 points that are available. And based on the number of points, that's sort of the priority that's going to be given to that particular project. And so this is just so you can wrap your head around sort of what Michigan is considering when it's determining what kind of priority to give certain projects. But we've certainly seen states get a little bit more creative with their scoring criteria than Michigan has, both in addressing certain issues and trying to bump up a little bit of give additional points to specific communities. So for example, New York, Ohio, and Wisconsin have all awarded points for projects that address lead and copper corrosion in particular. So prioritizing projects that address lead contamination. And then a few states have really looked at incorporating environmental justice more robustly. New York provides additional points to systems that serve a community with a median household income that's lower than the statewide median household income. And so just a few examples of ways that states can use scoring criteria to direct funds or give higher priorities to specific projects like lead and drinking water projects, or to specific communities like environmental justice communities. Another key topic for us as an organization has been interest rates. And really because when we did a survey of interest rates through drinking water SRF programs in the Great Lakes, they were kind of all over the map. You can see sort of the survey of interest rates here. A lot of them are setting them based on sort of market rates or bond rates. You can see Michigan's here. I mean, one of the first issues that we advocated out of Michigan was when we started, Michigan had a baseline rate of 2% for everyone, sort of a flat rate, 2%, 30-year term for every single community. And we really urged them to adopt a more flexible rate structure so that disadvantaged communities could get a better rate, which was something that we saw a lot of states doing. And that's something that Michigan adopted in the last few years. But you can see like Ohio is offering a disadvantaged community rate of 0 interest for a 40-year term. Some will go down to 1%. For example, Illinois offers a hardship rate of 1%. But I wanted to also give you just sort of a picture of what the base rates are in some of these different states, which I looked up this morning, just so you can get a sense for sort of how all over the place we are. I mean, Illinois' base rate right now is 1.1%, so pretty low. Ohio's is 0.64%, and so theirs is really low, and a lot of this has to do with sort of falling interest rates in the bond market. Indiana's is 2%. Wisconsin's base rate is around 1.76%. And so you can see they're just sort of all over the place. But what we've really advocated for is flexibility in rate structures and repayment terms, so that especially disadvantaged communities can access these funds in a way that's really helpful for them. Another key topic for us has been additional subsidies for disadvantaged communities. So there's a number of different sort of, as I mentioned at the start, funds for SRF programs come from a lot of different laws. One is the Safe Drinking Water Act mandates that states utilize at least 6% of their annual capitalization grants, not more than 35% of their capitalization grant, for additional subsidization for disadvantaged communities. the infrastructure law mandates that each state utilize at least 49% of its capitalization grant for principal loan forgiveness for eligible recipients. The appropriations bill that Congress generally passes every year is generally mandated that each state utilize 14% of its capitalization grant for additional subsidization for eligible recipients. One thing to look out for, in the past, we've had issues with Michigan in particular giving principal forgiveness to non-disadvantaged communities. I believe they've sort of stopped that practice as of last year, as far as I could tell. And also in that EPA guidance that was referenced earlier, they clarified that that 49% of its capitalization grants should be going to disadvantaged communities in particular. And so basically there's going to be a lot of money, like that $6 billion chunk of annual money in that bipartisan infrastructure bill. About half of it is going to be going to disadvantaged communities. So it's a big chance to sort of really make sure that environmental justice communities essentially are getting that money. But, and here's the rub, states have a lot of flexibility in defining disadvantaged communities. And so some states have done a really good job of defining them, and disadvantaged communities is essentially synonymous with what we would think of as an environmental justice community, but not always. And so you can see just sort of the range of definitions here. And I'm not going to go in depth into each one. I am going to note that most states are defining disadvantaged community in their intended use plan. I point that out to say, like, that definition can be changed from year to year, as with everything in the intended use plan. And so it's a key point of advocacy. Michigan, as was previously mentioned, defines disadvantaged community in statute, which has made changing that definition really burdensome. But I believe in House Bill 5890, which is pretty close to being passed, it would basically remove the definition of disadvantaged community from statute and leave it up to the department to define it in their intended use plan, which in my opinion is a good outcome. I'm not going to go into the details here. One thing I am going to pull out, this is something that we've seen in sort of commonly in states. So you'll see Wisconsin has defined a disadvantaged community as a community that has a population of less than 10,000 and a median household income 80% or less of the state's median household income. The key criteria here is the population of less than 10,000. So we're essentially locking larger urban centers out of the disadvantaged community definition. So places like Milwaukee aren't eligible in Wisconsin for the additional subsidies that come along with that disadvantaged community definition. And this is a common issue in other states. Like, we've seen this other places. So it's something to really look out for, because like I said, 49% of that bipartisan infrastructure money is going to be going in the form of an additional subsidy to a disadvantaged community. The EPA has largely left it up to states to define what is a disadvantaged community for them. And so it's going to be a really key topic for your state in the next few years, to make sure that how disadvantaged community is defined matches what an environmental justice community is in your state, and be on the lookout for criteria that limit disadvantaged community qualifications to small communities. Wanted to briefly touch on what the bipartisan infrastructure bill says about lead service line replacements. So there's going to be a lot of money going to lead service line replacements over the next 5 years. And it amended the Safe Drinking Water Act to require the EPA to establish grant programs and made sure that those grant programs were for the replacement of lead service lines and really whole lead service lines, and do not include partial lead service line replacements. There are a number of entities that are available for these funds, including qualified nonprofit organizations, and priority is going to be given to systems that have exceeded the lead action level in the last 3 years. Notably, low-income homeowners can be eligible for grant funds to replace the entire portion of their lead service line, not just the portion of the line that's on the public side of the water system. So that's very important. So now I want to transition to, and I'm going to close in sort of the next 3 slides, which is how do you get engaged, especially in your intended use plan. And like he said, this is a really great place for advocates to get engaged, because states have to publish their intended use plan every year. And it basically, and you can see sort of the specific content requirements there and the general purpose of intended use plans. You know, it's something that they have more or less complete control over, subject to Safe Drinking Water Act regulations and things of that nature. But like I said, a lot of flexibility. So states can do a lot of creative things, but notably, you know, not subject to approval of sort of the state legislature or things of that nature. And so like there's just a lot of chance for successful advocacy. Like you can see movement on some of these things in your state. We've certainly seen that. In Michigan, since we started advocating on this issue, you know, 3 to 4 years ago, is sort of changes in sort of the terms of interest rates, repayment terms, things of that nature. And so I would really encourage you to sort of get engaged on these issues. Here are the things that, and this is sort of pulling from sort of the key points that I had just shared, the things to watch out for, the things to make sure that you're engaging on. The first is interest rate and repayment terms. Are there sort of unique rates and terms for disadvantaged communities or specific types of projects? You know, you can make sure, and once again, you can look at what other states are doing, and you can say like, hey, you know, other states are providing really, really great rates for disadvantaged communities, really low rates, really long repayment terms for disadvantaged communities. Why aren't we doing that? That can be a really powerful advocacy tool. If you have interest in promoting a specific type of project, such as lead service line replacements or something like that, you can advocate for that. Some states will offer lower interest rates for lead service line replacement projects in particular. And so, you know, just pay attention to what your interest rates are. In general, you know, we advocate for better interest rates for disadvantaged communities, better interest rates for lead service line replacement projects in disadvantaged communities. And so, but it's sort of, you can sort of shape your advocacy however you see fit and to make it fit your priorities. Once again, disadvantaged community definition is super important. Is that definition limited to a small community? Does it exclude large urban centers? Like I mentioned, Wisconsin does. As a result, like Wisconsin, like when you look at the interest rate that a community like Milwaukee pays for their SRF program, it's generally some of the highest in the state. Smaller communities are getting lower interest rates. And so that's a key problem to make sure that you're looking out for. In Michigan, we sort of had the opposite problem. The disadvantaged community definition we thought is over-inclusive. We thought that communities that aren't generally, that we wouldn't categorize as environmental justice communities or as low-income communities are nonetheless eligible for disadvantaged community status and are eligible for the subsidies that come along with that status. So we've urged Michigan to basically tighten up their definition, but at the same time, make sure it's bringing in sort of those large urban centers, not necessarily restricting it to small communities. Scoring criteria is another big one. You know, what kind of projects are being prioritized? What kind of water systems are being prioritized? And just especially as, you know, competition for SRF dollars is ramping up a bit. And then, you know, lead service line replacements, making sure that your state in their intended use plan is making a commitment to replace entire lead service lines. Is there a prohibition against partial lead service line replacements? Just making sure that that commitment is being followed up on. And lastly, I want to touch on how you get engaged here. Because like I said, this is an area where you can have a lot of success. There are some obstacles that I want you to be aware of. So in general, each state will release its intended use plan annually for public notice and comment. Michigan has generally released it, as was previously shared, in August. Last year, their public hearing was on August 31st. But you can see it's once again, states are kind of all over the map here. I mean, Ohio was holding their public meetings in June, Indiana in September, Minnesota in September. And so, notably, those are pretty late in the process. One of the frustrations that we've had in our advocacy on this topic is that oftentimes when we submit comments in August on, say, that next year's intended use plan, the response that we'll get is, well, these are really helpful. These are great. We can't do anything with these comments for this upcoming year's intended use plan. We'll keep them in mind for the next year's. And so there's just sort of a mismatch between the public comment period and when that happens and when the states can oftentimes make amendments to their intended use plans. And that can be frustrating, but I'll also add this, what we've seen is, we have seen, at least in Michigan, some of the advocacy that we've raised in that year, even though it won't influence the intended use plan for that next year, it will have influence on that intended use plan for the year after. So it'll be a bit of oftentimes delayed gratification, but gratification nonetheless. And so I would encourage you to just communicate with your environmental department early. Try to see if you could get in earlier than the public hearing to have some input on what they're thinking about. But also, I think it's, even if you're not getting everything you want out of this year's intended use plan, you can nonetheless get a lot out of next year's by submitting comments this year, if that makes sense. And so it can still be a place that you have success, even though it can be a bit frustrating. But that is it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions that people have.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick. That was so informative. So I would love to have any questions people have for Nick. I see Commissioner has her hand up. Commissioner, go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Nick. That was very informative. I guess I'd like to know the definition of a disadvantaged community as opposed to what is considered a non-disadvantaged community. And I was reminded of that bond that I spoke of earlier that the community took out for the water filtration plant upgrades. That was for 3 communities, and 2 pulled out, and Ben Harbor ended up incurring the cost for all 3, and pleading with 2 city managers to write the federal government to see if in fact they could lower the interest rate so that we could have freed up money to do other things in the community, like addressing lead lines and all that type of stuff. And I won't stop until they do, or forgive it altogether. But please enlighten me on the disadvantaged as opposed to non-disadvantaged.
Yeah, so basically, I mean, it's 2 buckets. You're either a disadvantaged community or you're not. And so if you meet the criteria for in your given state, in this case in Michigan, for being a disadvantaged community, then you are a disadvantaged community, at least for the purposes of drinking water state revolving fund program. And what does that get for you? It gets you basically potentially eligible for a lower interest rate, for a longer repayment term in Michigan. It gets you eligible for some additional points in your scoring criteria in Michigan, so maybe a higher priority for your project. And it also makes you eligible for principal forgiveness, which I think is probably the biggest thing. I mean, in Michigan, it's basically, they're largely looking at median annual household income, and does that exceed 120% of the statewide median annual household income? That's a pretty low bar. A lot of states will make that more restrictive. Like, for example, Indiana, they're looking at, they require income below 80% of the state's median annual household income. So I say all of that to say, like, Michigan's initial criteria is pretty lenient. Like, a lot of communities can qualify under that, does not exceed the median annual household income for the community doesn't exceed 120% of the statewide median annual household income. The other criteria for Michigan is just the cost of the project. And so does basically compared to the household income. So is the household income less, or is the user cost for the project going to exceed 1% of the area's median household income? So those are the other criteria Michigan looks at. But like we said, in Michigan, the problem that we've seen is too many communities are eligible, meaning like, communities that are higher income are eligible to receive the subsidy. We wanted them to tighten up the definition to make sure that that additional subsidy is getting to the communities that really need it.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you so much, Nick. And, I think an important piece to go back to around that question is what you talked about, Nick, and I think the state representatives did as well. If the bill that's currently moving through the Michigan legislature is passed, my understanding is then the state will have to go, Eagle will have to undergo a process to create a new definition of disadvantaged community. And I think that will be an extremely important place for us to advocate. And believe me, Freshwater Future will be trying to engage everyone in that process and making things available so you can do that with your communities too, because that is so critical, especially with the current funds that have such a large amount of forgivable loans for disadvantaged communities.
Yeah, certainly. We've been really stymied, and like we certainly requested that Eagle make changes to that definition, and their response has typically been, well, we wish we could, we can't, because it would require the legislature to make that change. And now the legislature is basically taking it out of their hands, putting it in Eagle's hands, which is, an exciting thing, but also a thing that we have to, make sure that we're staying engaged in and advocating around, because now it's basically the time to sort of get the changes that we've always wanted.
Excellent, thank you. And I see from one of our participants, Grenetta Tomasi, just put something in the chat that says it passed yesterday. So that's good. Now we know the job we have to do, which is to really engage on that process. All right. Well, Nick, again, thank you so much. Great information. We will be continuing to work with Great Lakes Environmental Law Center as these things come up, so that we're all moving the same messages, and we'll be sharing that out, obviously, to all of the people who have been attending these things. So thank you for your time, Nick, and your expertise and all that great information you shared.
Of course, thank you.
Absolutely. And so now we're right on time. We have 15 minutes left. I'm so excited that we have Gwendolyn Winston from the Wisdom Institute, who will be sharing some closing remarks with us. But before we do that, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about those action steps for communities that I referenced earlier. And also, we'll be doing a quick survey about how you think your knowledge on SRF may have changed between the beginning of this webinar and the end of this. So Alana, maybe it's a good time to start that process, if you would. So 1 is I didn't know anything. 10 is I was an expert. And it's the same scale before and after. So we're just asking if you would each put in the chat. The first number would be what your knowledge was prior to this conversation, and then a comma, and a second number of what your knowledge is after the conversation. That's very helpful to us to improve our own work. So if you could all just put those things in, that would be extremely helpful to us. I'll give you just a minute to do that. And while people are finishing that up, I also wanted to just share with you that as you were registering for this, we asked you a couple of questions. Whether your community had applied for SRF funding and whether it had received any SRF funding. One thing we suspected would be that many of us don't know. And so out of the number that registered, 45 didn't know whether their community had applied, and 47 didn't know whether they received the money. 15 knew that they had not applied, and 16 knew that they did not receive any money, and 7 knew that they had applied and had received. So that's just one indicator. The advocacy on this topic is going to be really important, because if our community, we heard from the state and the feds that there is a community engagement process. We know that's not robust. We know it's not what it should be. And so that's one of the things Freshwater Future wants to help make available, is some resources and some money, so that if you need to engage on this with your community and hold your own public meeting to get people educated and interested, we want to help make that happen. All right, Alana, was there one more slide? I can't remember. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so action steps. We have some suggestions. There are lots of things I'm sure you know you could do after hearing this great information today. But we had a few things on which we wanted to draw your attention. And then also, we want to say that if there's a specific need you have in advocating with your community or with the state on any of this work, let us know if you need a resource. If there's something you need a letter example, you need a template for something, just give us a call and we will help figure that out. So the ones we have prepared for you today, though, are contacting your local decision makers. So sometimes that's not easy, and it's difficult to know who should I connect with and how do I do that. And so we do have a kind of cheat sheet for you on that. We have an example email that you can use to get connected to those decision makers. And we will make those things available. So after this call, probably tomorrow, you will receive another email with resources, and that will be included in there. So that's one thing, is contacting those local decision makers, starting with just asking them questions. Have we applied? Have we received any money? What are those projects for? When is the public meeting process going to happen? The second one is hosting a public forum. So we've put together a whole outline on this about how to go about holding a public forum. And that doesn't mean you have to do it with your municipality. You could if they're friendly, but you don't have to. And so this is where we have some grant funding available. We'd love to provide small grants. That might include things like your time to put things together. It might include food or other prizes to get people to the event. It could include rental space, any expense that you would have to undertake to have a public forum. So that will be in the packet of information. And then the information will be there about applying for a grant, how to do that. We'll make it really easy on you. I promise it won't be a long and hard process. And then the fourth thing is attending a city council meeting. Commissioner, I know you know what that is all about, but those are places where you can bring up these types of issues. They might not even have it on the agenda for a particular day, but you can go and have your voice heard anyway through the Public Meetings Act. And so you can always feel as though you can bring your voice to your city council or city commission through that process. And so we'll also include some information about that, because these things need to be told to our elected officials. If we're not hearing about the projects, if we're not understanding where the money is coming from and how that's going to be paid back if it has to, then we need to go and ask more questions. So we wanted to make those 4 points. We have the materials available, as I said, we'll get them out to you. But if you have other things that you're going to do and you need some support, just let us know. We're happy to help. All right. So we've done our survey. We've talked about our action steps. And I am now really pleased to turn it over to Gwen Winston. She is also a steering committee member of All About Water, as well as being leadership of the Wisdom Institute. So Gwen, if you would.
Thank you, Jill. My role is to sort of summarize what you have heard and experienced today. And we started off with True Cool, with liquid gold. Save that water, clean that water, drink that water. Do they got water on the east side, west side, north side, and south side? Let the water flow. So today was about the flowing of all of this water information. And we heard first from Jonathan at EPA, and he talked about the bipartisan infrastructure law, that it can make a difference. However, he says that we need many more conversations like today's session, and we need to talk about power. He talked about several realities. Being under-resourced is a challenge to participate. That's a reality. He talked about where we are at this moment. We have 5 years to do this work and to build resiliency and affordability. And that she shared that money flows in partnership with EPA to the states through the SRF. EPA sees a role for everyone. It's outlined in the memorandum. They're partnering with the state. And their goal is to grow and scale technical assistance opportunities. As we heard, it's coming down the pike. It's going to be starting in this technical assistance. It's going to be starting in summer, late summer, or early fall. And this is an opportunity for communities to get support from start to finish. Identify the challenges, conduct engineering studies, centering the community as stakeholders as a part of the process. And we have such a long list of links in the chat that will be shared with you. And in the question and answer, we learned that the problem is that politics is getting in the way. And there was a request for more oversight that's needed to ensure community engagement. Our knowledge is to follow the money to ensure community is engaged. We also heard from Eric Cocaine and Paul McDonald. What we know is the need and the infrastructure requests are more huge. So is having a large amount of funding. There's forgiveness for underserved communities. And you heard about eligibility qualification, what's eligible and non-eligible projects and costs, funding levels, loan forgiveness information, and how to apply by November 1st, 2022. And we were invited to attend a pre-application meeting to learn about what the components of a project plan, what's required. And we will be sharing that information as we learn. And another reality is that EPA is paying attention to communities' voices being heard and those voices that are not being heard. And while there was a recommendation to participate in community comments that's held 30 days before adopting the plan, EPA is looking at the environmental assessment of high public concern about the project. They're going to do an environmental assessment, again, to loop back on ensuring that the community's voice is heard. And then we heard from Jason Cole. Pat is his mother. I know his mother. He gave us, from the Michigan Minority Contractors Association, he gave us information about certification, about reaching out to young people, gave a lot of information about training centers, like the Biblical Faith Ministries, wraparound solutions, unique solutions. What's missing, mentoring, how to engage youth. He said what's new is that there are willing partners now on both sides of the table. He identified decision drivers at the contracting level. And from Nicholas, we know again, there's a lot of money coming through the state revolving fund. However, the investment in the needs is not really close to being met. And so across the board, that has occurred is that more project now than there are dollars. And he gave some basic intended use plan and utilizing state SRF, lifted scoring criteria, interest rate, subsidy, lead service line replacement. There's a lot to know about, and use Milwaukee as a model. So check out what Milwaukee is doing. And the key advocacy issues, flexibility in determining how states will administer the fund. What counts as a disadvantaged community, not working in Michigan as well as working other places. And the base key issues, interest rates, flexibility, forgiveness, subsidy. And look out for the interpretation more again, what the state is identifying as disadvantaged community. Does it match what an environmental justice state looks like? And whole lead service line replacement. Don't fall for partial line replacement. Whole lead service line replacement. He also talked about how to get involved and get the money. And the time is now for lifting up advocacy, support public comments early, and look for the state's intended use plan report. There's a lot of chance for successful advocacy. And Jill ended, of course, with action steps. Survey was taken, gave the results of the knowledge change. Oh no, we haven't gotten those results, we took the survey. Resources and grant money to engage with community is available. Suggest you host your own public meeting, that you contact local decision makers, and that attend the city council meeting, raise your voice, and then use Freshwater Futures Toolkit for community engagement advocacy. So you heard all of that, and it will be summarized on paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. That was an amazing recap. So appreciate you, and so appreciate the All About Water Steering Committee and membership that just does an amazing job of pinpointing these topics and bringing us back together on a regular basis. We're looking toward early fall for the next one of these, again on SRF, but no doubt on new topics. And we welcome everyone to join us for those, as well as our All About Water Steering Group. We're always looking for new members to participate in those monthly calls. With that, I give my great thanks to all of you participating, our speakers, everybody who brought this together and got the word out. I think it was a great opportunity to learn and hear from each other. We will get you lots more material tomorrow, and we appreciate all of your time. Please have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you all. Stay safe, everyone.
Take care.
Take care.